Thanks for having me, folks. As Seth said, DNS logs are really, if you're in a SOC, in a Windows environment, I'd say Windows event logs and DNS logs are the top two sources for threat intelligence, or threat hunting rather, right? And DNS logs, they're very actionable. We'll talk about how actionable they are, but the availability of DNS logs is changing rapidly, as in this week. Firefox is now turning on DNS over HTTPS by default in the US now, right? And this is severely impacting the visibility into this amazing threat hunting source. I borrowed Ishmael's tweet without asking him. Ishmael, thank you. So I did have a surreal moment coming to the airport yesterday and seeing that logo and our Blue Team Summit on an airport display. You know, sometimes I have these out-of-body experiences. You know, that logo, you know, is a riff off the Game of Thrones coin we have for Net Wars. The reason we have a Game of Thrones coin is there's a Game of Thrones theme for Net Wars. By the way, during the training event next week, brand new version of Cyber Defense Net Wars. And the reason we use Game of Thrones as that logo, or inspired by that logo for legal purposes, you know. I walked into a bookstore like 1995, bored, and I picked up the first, edition of that series. And by the way, if you want to read Game of Thrones, don't read it in real time, okay? Don't do that, okay? Wait till the end and read them all in a row. But I've been reading them real time for 20 plus years. And then I like that theme as an idea for a coin. You're defending the wall. And then to build out this whole Blue Team curriculum and see that logo on the wall and come to an airport with that thing showing as I come through, it's amazing. It's just amazing to work with a team of a whole bunch of people to build a Blue Team Summit, the cast of hundreds that have helped us build this thing, and you're here too helping us build this thing, and to see it double in size within a year, and you're going to come to an airport and see that, it was an out-of-body experience for me, you know. Seth and I have talked for years about how we're going to bring the sexy back to Blue Team, and I think it's been brought, my friends. You can see that now, right? And thank you. And, you know, I was on Paul's Security Weekly a couple years ago talking about Cyber Defense Net Wars, and Paul asked me, is it common for employers to send their employees to Blue Team challenges? Now, this is 2-3 years ago. 2-3 years ago, I could count on one hand how many there were for Blue Team. There were tons of cool, forensics conferences and coins and social nights and summits. There was tons of pen testing stuff like that with the net wars and coins and the music and the lights. Blue Team didn't really have much of that at all, right? It's changing now. We're helping change that. So I think you've seen the sex has been brought, and I'm just so thrilled. To see that was just amazing. So thanks, Ishmael, for grabbing that photo. All right, so let's talk DNS. Again, it's changing rapidly. It's changing almost daily now in ways that none of my clients are aware of. So you want to get in front of this. If you're using DNS as a threat hunting source, you want to pay careful attention here. DNS logs are one of the most actionable threat hunting sources. If you're in a SOC, if you're using a SIM, you should be ingesting DNS. Now, many SOCs and SIMs, or many SOCs, they ingest DNS for correlation, right? And correlation is great, but I find more important than correlation is actually threat hunting. Now, threat hunting is, of course, most of you know, it's the presumption of compromise, as a process, right? So all networks come pre-owned. Every network's already owned. And every defender should defend assuming their network is currently compromised. That is the presumption of compromise that leads to threat hunting. And again, in a Windows environment, Windows event logs are super actionable, and you're probably ingesting those in your SIM. But are you ingesting DNS logs as a threat hunting source? Because it's very, very actionable, right? And it used to be Zeek, formerly Bro, of course, now Zeek, was one of the easiest ways to grab those logs. But again, DNS encryption is changing that rapidly. So you have three basic options for logging DNS. You can, if you just if you have like what's called split DNS. Now, this talk could easily be 3 hours. This talk could easily be an entire course day. You know, one of the things I get excited about as an old school nerd, Unix system in 1991, we get hacked in 93, and my InfoSec career was launched then. And I said, this is my career. Handling incidents, doing stuff like that. In 93, when there were no titles, there was no money, I can tell you, there's this gold rush, people coming into InfoSec now, rushing in to grab the cash. My goal out of college was to make 40 grand a year. That was my goal. I wanted to own a car. It could be a used car. It didn't matter. It could be a beater. I wanted my own apartment. I wanted to make 40 grand a year. That was my goal out of college. And I ended up working in InfoSec, not that it paid a lot. My first job as Unix sysadmin paid $21,000 a year. right? Now, $21,000 in 1991 is more than $21,000 today, but it's still not a lot of money, right? But we didn't do it then for the money. You did it for the passion. I know passion's kind of overplayed now, but for me, passion, if you're gonna do something for 30 plus years, it helps if you like it, you know? It really helps if you enjoy what you do. You know, I have a friend who's a banker, one of my best friend, and he makes good money, he has a nice house, he has nice things, and he's unhappy because he hates his job. And I love this job. And one of the things that I really like about working in this industry is what first tuned me onto the internet was the sense of being on a frontier. It was exciting. It was just uncharted territory in '91. It still is uncharted territory. And the idea that I could help work with that and build that, I had the sense of being on a frontier, and I got a sense of excitement. And there were some things that come around, like IPv6, that I feel like I'm back on the frontier again. Or the way DNS is changing on a day-to-day basis now, I have that sense of being a pioneer again. And it keeps me excited. Like I remember Justin Henderson in the room, we co-authored 530 together, and I wrote a 1 quarter day section on IPv6. And if it was up to me, it would have been a full day or maybe a week on IPv6. I just love this stuff. I geek out on this stuff, right? And Justin's like, quarter day, is that too much? I'm like, that's not nearly enough. I want more. And the kind of the basic blocking and tackling of the architecture of the internet, DNS is the glue that holds everything together. Without DNS, most people wouldn't think the internet was there anymore, right? It is the glue that holds all of it together, and things are changing quite rapidly. So you could have like a split DNS setup. Again, I could do a day on this. Basically, well, not to go into all the details on that, point your local endpoints to a local DNS server, maybe your Active Directory server, log there. Great, that's easy, right? That's an easy way to centralize it. You can log on to clients, and Sysmon has some great advantages there we'll talk about. Or my preferred way up until recently was use Zeek. Just use Zeek to sniff on the network. A lot of tools like Rita can import Zeek DNS logs. To me, Zeek was just put a Zeek sensor at your outbound firewall, your outbound internet link. Put a Zeek sensor there, sniff DNS on TCP UDP port 53, done. That was always my preferred way. One-stop shopping, centralized, scales well, imports into your SIM well, great, but it's changing. And DNS encryption is changing that, right? So we have two competing standards now. This is not DNSSEC, by the way. DNSSEC was a whole different thing I won't talk too much about. This is DNS over HTTPS and the competing standard, DNS over TLS. Two different things, by the way, right? Both using encryption, both using essentially the same encryption, but done differently. And what's happening is browsers, most notably Firefox, are very aggressively rolling this on behalf of you without asking your opinion. Now, you can change any default setting, of course. As an enterprise, if you have control of the endpoints, have control of the clients, including the Firefox configuration or the Chrome configuration, or the Windows 10 configuration, you can turn this stuff on and off, right? We'll talk about Windows 10, which is going to be adopting DNS over HTTPS fairly shortly, by the way. If you have control of the endpoints and you know this stuff is happening, it's fairly easy to control. But knowledge is power. You have to know this stuff's happening. For my clients, it's silently happening on the back end. They're logging DNS, now they're getting a lot less DNS, and nobody knows, right? So how do you know when you're getting less logs? It's easy to not notice when you're getting less of something in a SIM, and a SOC. Believe me, I've been there, right? So I don't want to debate the merits of encrypted DNS. Personally, as a consumer, I'm a fan of this, right? Because if I know every website you're visiting, and I don't have your best interests at heart, I can use that against you. Even just from monetizing it, your ISP sells your DNS data. So if you have a cable modem at home, DSL at home, you and your wife, your husband, daughter, boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other, etc., your kids are all using DNS, of course. That's all being monetized. I don't want that. I have nothing against Spectrum Cable, but I don't want them selling my DNS data. Because if you know, having worked in the industry for a long time, I was the HIPAA security officer for the second largest healthcare provider in New England. That was my last full-time job about 12 years ago. Now I run my own company. But as an employee, I was the HIPAA security officer for the second largest healthcare provider in New England, and my team handled all investigations of acceptable use policy violations, all of them. So when HR came to me and said, tell me what sites this person visited, because perhaps they violated the acceptable use policy, we go look. And web logs, of course, give you a lot of that, but SSL is actually handling that as far as providing the encryption. So as more and more stuff is encrypted via SSL TLS, we always had DNS. But now DNS is being encrypted too. But once HR did ask me to investigate, If I know the website you're visiting and I know the DNS sites you're resolving, I know a lot about your love life, I know a lot about your financial life, I know a lot about your health, your hobbies, your interests. I know who you are, essentially. And I don't want, I have nothing against Spectrum Cable, but I don't want them knowing that stuff. If I have, or my wife or one of my kids has a health condition or something, whatever, right? Or what if you live in an oppressive country where the government is, using that against you? So personally, as a consumer, I'm a fan of this, right? But as a network defender, I don't want this. And one of the things I've said for years is my network, my rules. So when I'm at home, I want this stuff turned on. At work, in a SOC, I want to be able to see the DNS. And there's ways we can achieve both, actually. But again, knowledge is power. It starts with the knowledge. And I've learned not to fight the rising tide. This is coming. Buckle up, And I don't want to, there's no point debating the merits of it. It's coming. And you want to deal with it accordingly, right? So as I said, there's two competing standards. DNS over HTTPS is simply HTTPS. I set up a server, a DOH server. I'll demo that in a bit. And it is simply a web application accessed via TLS. That's it, okay? Meaning it blends right in. Blends right in. You can't tell it's DNS. In Firefox's case, well, you can't easily tell. Caveats apply. So if I'm going to 8.8.8.8:443, okay, that's DOH, DNS over HTTPS. But if I'm going to some unknown DOH server, DNS over HTTPS, that just blends in, right? You can't tell. Well, you can't easily tell. Now, of course, TLS inspection, if you have like a blue coat or something, you're doing the TLS, proxy and inspection, sure, you can see it then. But short of that, it's just web traffic. That's it. The competing and losing standard as far as market share goes is DNS over TLS. Yes, those are two separate things. And we'll show you some very angry quotes from Paul Vixie. Paul Vixie helped basically write, bind, and help build the DNS infrastructure on the planet. He's very much against DNS over HTTPS, as we'll see. And as a network defender, as a network architect and engineer, there's this concept of the control plane should be separate from the data plane, right? The control plane should be separate, meaning users' data should be a separate plane, like in a Cisco networking world. There's a control plane, how I manage stuff, how I SSH in and syslog, that's separate from the data. So for decades, many decades, we've had the control plane and the data plane. Uses data over here, controls stuff like DNS historically over there with a clear dividing line. And as a network engineer, that speaks to me, right? That makes sense to me, and I like that. It's a good design. And now we're intermingling the control plane and the data plane in ways network defenders can't see and can't easily control, right? And we'll talk about how to detect and prevent this kind of stuff. Obviously, DNS over TLS being easier to prevent because it's got its own dedicated port. Now, things are changing rapidly. As I was writing this talk last week, literally last week, midweek, Firefox announced a change. We're rolling it out. In the US, buckle up, here we go, right? So midweek, like sometime around Tuesday, Wednesday, Firefox flipped the switch. And now turning DNS over HTTPS on by default across the US. US only, because there's all kinds of implications, political implications. Can you do this in China? Can you do this in Europe with GDPR? There's all kinds of ramifications for this, right? But in the US, they flipped the switch. You may be using DNS over HTTPS right now in Firefox and not know it, right? Again, it's easy to know, it's easy to turn on and off, but that requires that knowledge, right? And I happened to, during my research for this, because it's so fast moving, I learned a lot too. Jim Troutman gave a fantastic talk at ShmooCon. He gave a fire talk. It actually won the best fire talk award at ShmooCon like last month. Great talk. Oh, all these links are on my website, by the way. I should have mentioned that earlier, sorry. If you go to ericconrad.com, this talk is there. You can download it right now. A common piece of feedback from my talk is, Eric, you covered so much information, you talk so fast, I couldn't write it all down fast enough, and my answer is yeah, that's right. Get used to that. There's more of that coming, right? All the links, my talk is right there. You can actually download the PDF right now of this very talk. And so all those resources are right there, okay? And things are evolving quickly. So I'll keep posting updates to ericconrad.com. Again, the talk's there now, but as new stuff comes up, I'm going to give this talk again at the Atlantic Security Conference in Halifax, Nova Scotia in about a month or so. And I'm sure I'll have a bunch of updates then too. I know I will. I'll post that talk, which will be this talk just updated again. So if you just go to my website to track this stuff. And Jim Troutman's talk is a fantastic talk to start with. Really good. That's more of a network engineer architect kind of thing. Like he builds like ISP-style networks, so it's more of a take on that than defending. But it's a good engineering take. If you're an engineer, really, really good talk, okay? So DNS of a TLS is Paul Vixie's preferred way of doing this. Paul Vixie, who basically built Bind, or one of the teams that built Bind, he wants to separate the control plane from the data plane, give it a dedicated port that's in Etsy services, well-known service, all that kind of stuff, right? And explicitly uses TCP port 853. As a defender, it's easy to manage. You don't want people using it, block port 853 in your firewall, done, right? Easy, right? So if you want your users to have this, let it out. If you don't want them to, or at least do it over the internet, you can also, of course, have a local DOH or DOT resolver internally as well. And I've set up one on the internet I'll show you in a bit. And so it's, again, a clear distinction between the control plane and the data plane. Users have increased privacy. Network engineers and architects can control this very easily. This, however, is not winning. This is losing the battle for mind share, market share. DOT is losing. And the initial trend was operating systems. This has changed again. Operating systems, like you want your whole OS to use something like this. DOT seem to be the operating system solution. And then for the browser, they seem to use DOH. So you want the whole OS protected, all applications on the OS. DOT was the early winner until Microsoft announced the change. Things are changing. And then the browsers seem to go DOH. And Linux went that way. If you use Android 9, you're using DOT right now. And it's called, as you see there, a private DNS mode. You're using it, so any modern Android phone, you're using it right now, whether you knew it or not, right? And Linux, through systemd, can actually turn on, it's not on by default, you can turn on DOT on most modern Linuxes by one systemd configuration, done, right? However, Microsoft has bucked that trend of OSs going DOT and browsers going DOH. Microsoft has announced Windows 10 will adopt DOH. Now, of course, they haven't turned that on yet. And when they do, of course, it'll be controllable to all the typical things, Active Directory, group policy, all that good stuff you're already doing. So it's not a big deal, again, if you know it's there, right? But in the short term, for sure, DOH, as far as, I haven't seen percentages of most common protocols, but again, you can't spot DOH, it's just HTTPS. So doing some graph on the internet of which protocol is winning, how do you know DOH is winning or losing? Because it's just HTTPS. It's just blending in with all the billions of the packets out there, right? But certainly, it's, for as far as eyeballs and mind share, market share, DOH is crushing it right now. Here's Paul Vixie's thoughts on this. It's a cluster duck for internet security. He's talking about DOH there, of course. So he's not shy about his opinions, as many nerds are, right? And it's a bypass, over-the-top bypass of enterprise and other private networks. DNS is the control plane. So Paul Vixie, who will build DNS, doesn't want this, but his argument's losing. Again, I'm a realist. It's coming. Let's get ready, right? And last week, that headline is February 25th. It's now March 1st, right? So literally last week, as I'm writing this paper, this talk, boom, being rolled out right now. And if you want to get your arms, one of the things we say in the industry is eat your own dog food. You can't defend against something unless you use it, right? That's why I advocate testing IPv6 at your company. You're using IPv6 right now, whether you know it or not. You didn't have to turn anything on. Microsoft and others have turned it on for you. Microsoft uses IPv6. This is not an IPv6 talk, obviously, but you can't defend against something or secure something if you're not using it, or at least intentionally using it, right? So since this is coming, it's not on by default in Chrome yet, but that's going to change, I'm betting. It's being turned on Firefox now. Someone in your company should be testing this stuff now, like this week or maybe after you get home from this conference, right? It's rolling out now. By default, before last week, this was unchecked, right? Unchecked. Now that box is being checked on your behalf if you're a Firefox user. But again, it's very easy to control if you want to turn this on or off. It's very transparent that way. And by default, it was off. That's now being turned on, right? And controversially, Firefox changes your DNS provider to Cloudflare without explicitly asking you. Very controversial, right? So you're using 8.8.8, which is Google, or 1.1.1 with Cloudflare, or 9.9.9, one of these providers out there, or you're using your ISP's DNS server, your cable modem's DNS server, and then within Firefox, it bypasses all your operating system controls and changes it to Cloudflare by default, whether you wanted Cloudflare or not. Again, you can change this. But I found in my career that defaults are powerful. Defaults tend to stick, right? Whatever the default is tends to be the thing. So you can change all that, but very controversial to say, you know what, you're currently using Spectrum Cable as your provider, or Google at 8.8.8.8. We're going to upgrade you to Cloudflare. And click, done, right? So pretty controversial. Again, as a consumer, I'm not against this. Ultimately, who do you trust? You know, do you trust your ISP? At some point, as I'll discuss briefly in a bit, it's going to be unencrypted. Most DNS requests will eventually revert to DO53, as it's now called, right? DO53 is plain text, unencrypted DNS over TCP UDP port 53, right? And at some point, most DNS requests will become that, because the global DNS infrastructure is still there. So you might have a DOH connection to Cloudflare, but then Cloudflare is going to resolve those names normally. So at some point, the DNS is, in most cases, the only exception, well, one exception, not to go, again, I could talk for 3 hours on this. If your DOH server is also the authoritative server, like if you go to 8.8.8.8, which is Google, and you resolve a Google name, and that server happens to be Google's authoritative server, then boom, that's all encrypted. But if I try to resolve ericconrad.com via Cloudflare, at some point that's going to resolve encrypted to Cloudflare and then unencrypted after that, right? So at some point, you got to trust someone. Do you trust your cable modem provider? Do you trust your company you work for? Do you trust Cloudflare? At some point, someone's going to see that. Someone could see that data, right? So who do you trust? I'm okay with Cloudflare resolving my data, my DNS rather, but maybe you're not. Your choice, right? You can also, of course, so other options. Now, what do? Maybe you're not logging DNS at all. All right? Your users are enjoying more privacy and nothing's really changed operationally for you. Now, you should be logging DNS. So if you're in the first camp, I recommend you leave that camp and log DNS because it's so active. Again, not just for correlation, for threat hunting, okay? And you can also block it. If that domain name can't resolve, Firefox won't use DOH. So your internal, on your Active Directory server, you simply refuse to resolve that name or recursively resolve that name, boom, Firefox will fall back to normal DNS, which is the easiest one-stop shopping for everyone. That also requires no touching of the endpoints, which has some advantages, especially for environments like maybe universities where you don't control every endpoint, things like that. Bring your own device, right? That's a nice feature. Or allow it and log it, right? Set up your own DOH server yourself, as I have, right? So that's Zeus.me. Macedonia had a $1 sale one day. $1 for any Macedonian domain, and I live in Maine. I'm from Boston originally, but I live in Maine now. And .me is not Maine, it's Macedonia, but I like .me because I'm in Maine. And very short names were available, like 3-letter names. So Zeus.me, I splurged and spent $1 on that a few years ago. And I set up a DOH server there. Very, very easy to set up, by the way. So again, I encourage you to, someone in your company should lab this stuff up and test it, right? So you can allow DOH to your own server, log there, right? Great. Or you can also log locally, which in Firefox is not terribly pretty, just FYI, right? So let's say you decide to just use Cloudflare or whoever, NextDNS or Google, whoever, and log on the endpoint. Again, Firefox bypasses all your local operating system controls. Sysmon doesn't work for DNS logging on Firefox. You don't get anything as far as any kind of logs other than turning the logs on yourself within Firefox. You can do that. The default is NS Host Resolver 5, which is crazy verbose. Man, like one resolution is like 100 lines of a log file. It's nasty, nasty. Have you ever seen bind debug logging to get the responses? Like bind, if you want to log queries on bind, the most common name server, that's easy. Responses requires like debug level 10, which is just nasty, right? And Host Resolver 5 is basically debug logging. It's super verbose. Playing with this last week, I tuned it down to 1. 0 doesn't do anything, as you'd expect, but I tested that. 1 was the least, and it's still not great. Like, as a SOC analyst, you're not like, yes, you know, it's plain text, there's no date, date, time, I like that. Once you start logging DNS, you do gain an appreciation for how relentlessly stalked you are on the internet. Like all the ad networks and all the creepy, all that kind of stuff. It's like, this is like me going to CNN.com once. And this is multiple page, one visit to CNN.com. This is like one page of 4. It's just, you do get an appreciation for how relentlessly spied on you are, which makes me appreciate DOH and DOT. Like, hey, I'd rather not have the whole world seeing that stuff. Again, monetizing that, selling that, etc. Now, Chrome has not enabled DOH by default, but they're planning to. And they take a different approach. They're taking the upgrade approach. I actually agree with Chrome's approach better. Firefox says, you know what, it's going to be Cloudflare. You can change that, but we're going to make it Cloudflare. And if you didn't notice, well, now it's Cloudflare. Chrome's like, okay, tell you what. If you're using one of these providers already, like if you're already using OpenDNS, DO53 being unencrypted, we'll keep it OpenDNS and upgrade you to DOH. That makes sense to me. I like that better. You know, as opposed to overriding my chosen DNS vendor or provider, we'll upgrade you. So if you're on that list already, we'll upgrade you. If you're not, we'll leave you alone. I think that's a better approach, right? In my opinion, right? It's rolling out in test cases slowly, just like Firefox started slowly, but now Firefox has flipped the switch. I predict within months, maybe weeks, I'll say months, Vegas odds, Chrome will do the same thing. Now, you've taken my advice, you want to eat your own dog food. Good. Set it up. I've never set this up before, but we talk about this. We added a new section of Security 511, and common student question is like, what is it? Is it the same protocol? What does it look like? I'm like, I've never actually done it, so let me find out. So I set up a DOH server, literally 10 minutes. You know, DigitalOcean, they have $5 a month Linux VMs. They're their cheapest, lowest end VM. I set that up, $5 a month. That guide is fantastic. Link's also on my website. Fantastic. If you use Ubuntu 1804, initially I used the newer Ubuntu, but then I got kind of thrown off by some of the package dependency stuff. I decided to roll back to 1804, which is a long-term support version that's currently in effect. And I followed that guide pretty much blow by blow. And within 10 minutes, I was rolling, right? Real easy to set up. You don't need to affect anything at work. You can just grab a cheap VM in the cloud. Google, I believe, this guide talks about that. Google has a low-end VM you can use for free. If you have a Google account, they'll give you one for free. So just set up that in Google if you want. It won't cost you a penny. And then have Firefox point at that thing, your own personal Firefox, just to test it, just to see what it looks like, right? Again, I think you have to use this stuff to secure it, right? So also, I got Pi-hole going on now too. So Pi-hole does all kinds of like ad blocking and tracker blocking and things like that. I've got that going as well. Now Spectrum's not seeing all my DNS traffic. My own personal web server is, right? Now, of course, who do you trust? That's in DigitalOcean's cloud. DigitalOcean can see the DNS requests going out from that server, but at some point, someone's going to see that. I'm okay with DigitalOcean seeing that rather than Spectrum, because I know Spectrum's selling that. I'm not picking on Spectrum. They're a fine provider, but any provider of home, cable, internet is probably selling that data. I don't want them to sell my data, right? Now, common question, what does it look like? It's simply a web server. So for the network defenders, again, going back a bit, knowing a user's using one of these providers, that's easy. Because they're at known IP addresses, that's easy. But knowing a user's using my provider, good luck. That's just a website. And I can show you, it's just a website. If I see if I can, that's my DOH server. Thank you, Homer Simpson. All right. It's just a web server. And I've got a certificate. Let's encrypt, blah, blah, blah. It's just a web server. It's just a web server that has this app. It's just a post. So it's just a web app with a post. So detecting or preventing this means, can you prevent access to a web app, an unknown web app you didn't build via TLS, and you're not inspecting TLS? The answer is, well, not easily. We'll talk about options for that, for detecting this stuff, right? So it's just a web server. So as I said, if you want to block known providers, Cloudflare, you decide not to embrace this, you want to keep your plain text DNS that Zeek can ingest, et cetera, you want to just bypass all this stuff, known resolvers, easy. 1.1.1, 9.9.9, 8.8.8, :443, that's a DOH server, right? But unknown, there's my custom DOH server, right? And you can't easily block that. That's just going to essentially work. We'll talk about beaconing, because beaconing is actually one way to catch this stuff, right? So prevention is not going to be very pragmatic for unknown resolvers. Detection, it looks like beaconing. So another key detect in a SOC is beaconing. And Seth and I have talked about beaconing in 5.11 for over 5 years now. Something persistently sending a connection out, especially to the same site, the same IP, the same port, over and over and over again. That is DOH. In Firefox, I was creating tens of thousands of DNS requests per day, tens of thousands, all going to my server at dns.zez.me and DigitalOcean's cloud. So what Rita says, Rita's by Black Hills InfoSec, John Strand's company. So I wrote a very simple tool called persistent.pl. Persistent.pl said, okay, and actually persistent.pl would catch this as well. Persistent.pl was a very, very simple script, and it's on, if you Google SANS blue team persistent.pl, yes, Perl, old school, Perl nerd here. People give me a hard time about that. It's not a Python, it's in Perl. And all it does is it chops the day into 5-minute chunks. Midnight to 12:05, 12:05 to 12:10, 12:10 to 12:15. Did any of your IP addresses connect outbound to another IP address at least once in every 5-minute chunk? Like, did something connect to the internet from at least one packet from midnight to 12:05, 12:05 to 12:10, 12:10 to 12:15, ... So you've got a bunch of chunks, 12 5-minute chunks in an hour, 24 hours in a day. What system sent a packet in all or most of those chunks? At least one. And that was a very simple way of detecting beaconing very successfully. I talked to John Strand about the concept of beaconing years ago when he talked about this idea for Rita, which is a way, way more advanced and better take on all that. So Google Rita, it's also on my website at Conrad.com, a link to Rita. And they did a whole lot more heuristics to catch beaconing, something persistently connecting outbound. DOH looks like beaconing. It'll light up any beaconing detection. So I believe beacon detection is the best way of catching DOH or maybe DOT in a non-standard port, because 853 is the standard port for DOT, but you can use a different port, right? So beacon detection is the winning way to go, in my opinion, okay? And again, during my research, SANS STI student, I'm a proud alumni of SANS STI. Drew Helm's paper, A New Needle in a Haystack Detecting DNS over HTTPS, great paper. He talks about Rita in detail. Other things you can use like GA3 to detect the Salesforce product that uses, or tool that uses Zeek data to fingerprint X509 certs and track X509 certs called GA3. Other things like that I don't have time to go into much here. Check out that paper. Great killer feature for Sysmon recently added is DNS logging. And the killer feature here, it shows you the client making the request. That is beautiful. Zeek doesn't give you that, not really, right? So I know the IP address making a request. Sysmon tells me the application making the request. That is a killer, killer feature. As a threat hunter, knowing the applications that are resolving stuff, knowing PowerShell is resolving something, or knowing that WMix resolving something, or PSExec is trying to resolve something, that's a killer, killer feature, right? Killer threat hunting feature. And none of our other tools gave us that. Sysmon does. So Sysmon, of course, you know, Mark Rasinovich, sysinternals, right? A Microsoft Now team who adds a whole bunch of awesome threat hunting goodness to Windows systems. Now, of course, you know, sysinternals is not installed by default. It's an add-on, but you download it from Microsoft.com. And Sysmon is wonderful. Again, I could talk about this for hours or days, really. Swift on security Sysmon config if you want to get started with Sysmon for an enterprise-tested, you know, production-grade Sysmon config. Sysmon does a whole lot more than DNS. It does all kinds of stuff, you know, process creation, logging all hashes of every launch process, all kinds of useful stuff in Sysmon for threat hunting. You should be using Sysmon in a Windows environment. Scales globally. Microsoft runs Sysmon globally. Fairly recent addition from last year is DNS logging. And again, the killer feature of seeing the application making that request, very, very useful. Unfortunately, Firefox bypasses all that. Firefox has it's all built inside of Firefox, so Sysmon doesn't see that, which is a bummer. All right. Now that we're logging DNS, what do we look for, right? So I've given you a kind of a lightning round overview, and you know, one of my methods to my madness is like 39 slides in 45 minutes is about my speed, right? Because my thought is I'd rather say more than less. I'm being recorded. The talk's online. You can download it later. I hate to say less. I'd rather say more. So a lightning round review of the current state of DNS that's rapidly changing, as you know. Now we've got DNS. What do we do with it, right? Since I said DNS, it says that DNS is like the best threat hunting source, what do you do? Well, most malware is going to resolve names for a variety of reasons, right? Malware is going to resolve names just like you want to resolve names to go somewhere, right? Not tied to an IP. Malware doesn't want to necessarily use IP addresses because you can blacklist those and things like that. DNS is a lot more fluid that way. It also leads to domain name generation, leads to command and control, all kinds of stuff. Very, very useful. Baby domains we'll talk about, internationalized domain names, lookalike domains, things like that. And here's an example of Zeus Botnet from 511 here. One of my earlier threat hunting successes is, this is based on that. So I want to do a third-party threat hunt. Okay, threat hunting is finding the compromises your prevention and detection have failed to prevent and detect. That's a threat hunt, right? Become very much in vogue now, right? I believe in the future, in the near future, a third-party threat hunt will be pretty much expected due care, due diligence, just like a third-party pen test is. Certainly in mergers, acquisitions, you have to threat hunt. I speak to this from direct experience. If you merge or acquire a company, you must, with a capital M, must threat hunt. As a former HIPAA security officer whose company acquired 2 failing hospitals, one-off hospitals, I can tell you very directly, you must threat hunt, right? And so third-party threat hunts are becoming more common now. On a third-party threat hunt my company took part in, I worked on, I come into the company and I want, so I want to do a threat hunt. I want Windows event logs, I want DNS logs, I want firewall logs, I want access to your IDS, I want access to your SIM. The company I was at, I was on site, it was one of these very red tape laden, fill out the account requisition form and complete your TPS report and come back on Thursday and check on that kind of thing, And I'm there like a couple of days, I don't have time for, TPS reports and the change management meeting on Thursday when I'm there Monday. That's kind of the place it is. I asked for access to Windows event logs, and that requires a Windows account, a Microsoft account, AD, and those were approved on Wednesday afternoon, that kind of a thing. And I've got no data. I'm like suffocating with no data. And I see this old school gray beard coming down the hallway, like classic Unix gray beard, like a Usenix 97 t-shirt, big gut, I'm like, my people minus the beard, my people. I'm like, man, I'm trying to get some data here. I'm trying to get some DNS. He's like, oh, I manage the DNS servers. I'm like, you do? Are you logging on DNS? He's like, no. I'm like, do you mind turning on logging? And he's my people, Unix Graybeard. He did. Turned on logging. I said, just give me like 10-minute snippet. Just give me 10 minutes of requests. Give me that, and I'll start there. Hands me USB. Boom. Right there, right? This is not resolution. This is communication. Zeus Botnet, notorious banking botnet. Communicating, C2 is command and control, right? Command and control, the way the attacker controls the endpoint, the botnet controls the endpoint, right? DNS is the ideal C2 channel, the best C2 channel. It's better than ICMP. It's better than almost anything. Why? It's allowed. Even on lockdown networks, it's allowed. Like, I've had clients of mine say, Eric, this network allows no outbound internet connectivity. It's a lockdown subnet. And I walk up to an endpoint, I type nslookup google.com, and I get an answer. I'm like, that's bidirectional internet connectivity. Like, well, no, that's going through a local resolver. I'm like, a local resolver, that's a DNS proxy. If you're doing a recursion, DNS recursion, outbound recursion, as almost all of you are, that's proxying. A DNS resolver is a DNS proxy. We don't think of them that way, but they are. So if I type randomstring.google.com, Google gets that, and then Google responds. I don't care how many forwarders you go through, that's bidirectional internet connectivity, right? It makes the ideal C2 channel as the Zeus Botnet discovered, right? So I discovered that with 10 minutes of DNS logs. I ran to the CIO's office. I said, we have a problem, and please get me more data, because this network is pre-owned, as I predicted. So again, it's ideal. Most people treat DNS as a service, like electricity. It's on or it's off. That's it, right? It's very binary. It's resolving or it's not, and that's it. I recommend you go a lot deeper on DNS, as you know. It's usually allowed outbound, even on lockdown subnets. It works for your forwarders, and anything that can resolve a name can tunnel to the internet, okay? And DNS tunnels are very difficult to mitigate, as we'll see. Quick example on iodine is there's DNS Cat2 and there's iodine. I happen to like iodine because DNS Cat2 can tunnel any TCP protocol. Iodine can tunnel any IP protocol, very useful. And once you start logging DNS, it looks crazy. Like, look at that. That is an SSH tunnel. That SSH tunnel is going from an endpoint in my office to a local DNS forwarder server in my office, to Google at 8.8.8.8, then finally to my primary DNS server, right? So you set up a primary DNS server, which might cost you $5 a month in DigitalOcean's cloud or something like that, and it's going in from local resolver, local host rather, client, local resolver, Google at 8.8.8.8, then finally my primary DNS server, I SSH through Google. So I SSH through 8.8.8.8. The reason I did that was to demonstrate it's going to work, right? One of the things you want to, as a defender, null records. I've never seen null records used for anything but evil. I've asked a lot of people who do a lot of DNS. And if you do a lot of DNS and you know of any non-malicious use of null records, please tell me today. Grab me on the next break, whatever. I want to hear about that, because I've never seen anything but malicious use for null records. Null records are experimental record, been around since the 80s, used to carry binary data. You can carry binary data inside of DNS. I didn't know that. I've managed DNS for almost 30 years. I didn't know you can carry a binary data, but binary data allows very efficient tunneling, doesn't it? So if you see null records, there's all kinds of different ways to tunnel. Null records should be blocked and alerted in your environment. I don't see any normal use for them. One thing you want to look for is resolutions to, you see down here, eej.me. I told you I bought some Macedonian domains. That's another one, right? eej.me. I made 138 requests to something.something.eej.me. 138 different requests. You know, is it typical to resolve 1,000 different things domain.tld on the internet? Like you might go to www.google.com, you might go to maps.google.com or images.google.com, but do you go to 1,000 different things.google.com? No. So the way a lot of the DNS tunnels work is they resolve hundreds or thousands of names .something in the same domain and TLD. So hundreds or thousands of things .eej.me, or 138 in this case. Not normal, right? So again, once you're logging, you can see how important DNS is to log, right? Once you're logging DNS, it gives you amazing visibility for building dashboards of saying, show me the top 10 most common by volume resolutions, different resolutions .something. Give me a dashboard on that. Super actionable, live dashboard, threat hunting source, right? And Mark Baggett. So we love Mark Baggett. So Seth and I, you may have heard me say this before, but I think it bears repeating. When we built 511, Security 511, we thought, I can tell by looking at a string that it's randomly generated, because malware makes heavy use of randomly generated things. If I called it like, you know, evilexe.exe every time, it's easy to blacklist. You know, evilexe.exe, that's a string that some vendor is going to blacklist, right? But if I randomly generate the exe name every time, or the DLL name every time, or the domain name every time, I just randomly generate this stuff through domain generation algorithms, right? If as a human in a SOC, I see that random string .something, I can spot that as a human and say, hey, that's randomly generated. We're good at detecting patterns that way. We're very good that way, right? And we thought, me and Seth thought, well, we'll just write a script to do that. That's going to be easy. We have a tool called Entropy, Claude Shannon's Entropy, you know. Ent's built into pretty much any version of Linux, Unix. Ent calculates how random that string is. This is going to be easy. We'll just use Ent and build a dashboard and a SOC based on Ent, and that's going to be a piece of cake. It turns out it's actually way, way harder than that. Way harder than that. Because randomly generated domain names use letters and numbers. And really, since DNS is, you know, case insensitive, you get 26 letters and 10 numbers and a couple of symbols. But you're talking 40-odd characters in a randomly generated name out of 256. And any cryptanalyst will tell you, if you're using 40 characters out of a key space of 256, that's never going to be high entropy. Entropy means disorder, randomness, chaos, right? That's what entropy means, right? So if I'm using 40 out of a data set of 256, that's never going to be high entropy. So even on domain generation algorithm strings, which I'll show you in a bit, the entropy was low. So it seemed easy, it was hard, and me and Seth did what a lot of engineers do. We gave up. We're like, oh, well, maybe we'll find someone smarter than us who can figure this out for us. And we did, Mark Baggett. So Mark Baggett, he was sitting in the back of 511 with Seth, and Seth's like, and Mark's a Python genius, and Seth's giving him little assignments during the week, because Mark's trying to expand, which he has, his Python class to include more blue team goodness, which he's done, you know. And he sat in the back of 511 to kind of soak up some blue team goodness, to get some ideas for all that kind of stuff, right? Seth's like, hey, Mark, me and Conrad couldn't figure this thing out because we're not that smart. Can you all figure that out? Tell me if something's randomly generated, programmatically. I know as a human I can look at that, but tell me programmatically that thing's randomly generated. Mark's like, clickety, 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 click. Here you go, freak.py, right? And the beauty of freak.py, because Mark's a smart guy, is you feed it a corpus, like the Cisco umbrella top million DNS names, right? Now, Alexa used to have the Alexa top million for free, top million websites. That's no longer free, right? But Cisco umbrella, which is DNS data. So Alexa's web data, Cisco umbrella's DNS data, but similar data if you think about it. Cisco umbrella top million. You feed it the Cisco umbrella top million DNS names, right? And it says, okay, how often is Q followed by a different letter that's not you in that corpus? It's called a corpus, right? And so feed it whatever corpus you want. Top million domain names. And then freak.py will tell you the new names you're seeing that are the least like those million. The least like them, the least like the Cisco umbrella top million. Super, super useful. So you just build a dashboard that updates every 5 minutes of the least likely domain names by percentage, by marks, calculation. How often is Q followed by U or not followed by U? How often is Q followed by Z in English? How often is Q followed by X? The answer is not that often, right? And it builds a percentage score of how likely or how unlikely that name is. Have a dashboard rolling of the 10 least likely names. Very, very actionable. And it catches stuff like this. This is some ransomware I was testing on behalf of US DoD. US DoD funded my company to do some research on ransomware. I had some extra ransomware left over, so I sat in my office for about 6 weeks. I built an isolated subnet. I had a Windows 7 unpatched VM. I surfed the internet. I went to malwaredomains.com. I clicked with wild abandon. I said yes to everything. I enabled macros and everything. I became layer 8. I lived layer 8. You know, layer 8 is the layer above layer 7, the human layer, right? So I became a living embodiment of layer 8 for about 6 weeks. It was a blast. It's a lot of fun. You should try that. It's a lot of fun, right? And here's some malware that I didn't have a chance to analyze for DoD. You know, you see these names here. And what happens is when a piece of malware wants to connect back to the mothership, the botnet, right? It doesn't want to connect to one of these names. Because if it only connects to that name there, this SU name I'm showing right there, if it only connects there, to that one, some vendor's going to blacklist that. They're going to play whack-a-mole and blacklist that. So instead of having one name, why don't we have 50 names? And that list of 50 names changes every 4 to 8 hours, right? So every 4 to 8 hours, the list of 50 names changes. And the botnet knows the list of 50 names that are in effect for that 8-hour period. The bot itself, the client knows, and then instead of registering 50 domains, they'll register one. And then 8 hours later, they'll register another one, and another one, and another one. And that way, your blacklist can't keep up. So how do I detect that? I can't do a pattern match, because by definition, domain generation algorithms are changing those patterns, right? So I can detect the entropy. How random is that name? Or, I think this is Justin Henderson's term, baby domains, brand new domain. How often does your CFO go to a domain registered 4 hours earlier when they're not being owned? How often does that happen? The answer is never. How often does an executive go to a domain that's under 24 hours old, minted that day? It simply doesn't happen. So a combination of looking for high entropy names through freak.py and baby domains, brand new domains, very actionable. And for freak.py, it's not just domain names. It's all kinds of stuff. Again, you feed it a corpus, right? A body of data. I mentioned the Cisco Umbrella Top Million. How about you take your Windows 10 install image, grab every EXE and DLL name off that, that's your corpus. Just the actual string names of every EXE and every DLL on your Windows 10 master image that you ghost out, right? That's your corpus. Then tell me all the names that are least like those names statistically. Super useful, right? And Justin, I believe, broke freak.py. He's in the room. So it was a Perl script. And when you want to check like hundreds of thousands of requests per second, it might break, as scripts tend to do. So Justin's like, hey, can you make like something that scales to like hundreds of thousands per second? Because I've got this giant like 500+ site WAN, and I want to check every single DNS resolution in the whole place live. So a 500 site security onion plus site security onion network spanning the country, I want to check every single DNS resolution live. Grab it through Zeek, feed it in, go, and your script's blowing up, as scripts tend to do at that scale. So freak.server now, freakserver.py rather, boom, 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 it scales to hundreds of thousands per second. It scales, right? Now, DNS twist. And DNS twist looks at these things called cousin domains, and I can show you some of these. My SSH connection timed out, but I did have this, I believe, back here, yeah. So I ran DNS twist previously. So I decided to check a commonly, let me increase the font here a bit. I decided to check PayPal.com. I have no connection to PayPal.com, but it's a commonly phished domain. So the idea for a cousin domain is someone's registered a domain very similar to yours because they want to basically do phishing campaigns, they want to do spear phishing against your executives, they pretend to be your firm, they pretend to be your accounting firm. JohnsonAccounting.com becomes JohnsonAccountants.com, and some black hat registers JohnsonAccountants.com. You use JohnsonAccounting.com, and now you're getting email from Fred at JohnsonAccountants.com, but your actual CP is Fred at JohnsonAccounting.com. These things can be deadly. I've handled these kind of spear phishing campaigns and whale hunting hands-on. I've seen companies lose millions and millions of dollars through lookalike domains, things like that, right? So I have no connection to PayPal.com, but PayPal.com is the kind of domain that someone's going to want to spoof that way, to steal your PayPal, steal your money, right? And there's these things called homoglyphs, which I find interesting. Homoglyphs like those, right? Look at those two right there. That's not ASCII. That's not the PayPal you know and love. That's a whole different PayPal, whole different PayPal. So DNS now supports, of course, Unicode. It supports Cyrillic and Kanji and all kinds of other stuff. And it turns out a Cyrillic A is the same as our A, pixel by pixel, same A. It's a different character, same A, right? So Cyrillic A is our ASCII A if you look at the pixels. Now, the Unicode Cyrillic A is actually a 2-byte character that's not our ASCII A at all. But for a human to look at it, it is that A. Look at that thing. That, to me, looks perfect. That's not PayPal. That is a homoglyph. DNS Twist caught that, right? DNS Twist says, okay, give me whatever name you want, and I'll see all the permutations. And what I did here was, it actually looks them up. So it generates all these permutations, and I said, go check paypal.com, and these are the things like paypal.com. Sometimes people added a letter. Sometimes people did some bit squatting here. Did they just change the letter? Or, for me, the deadliest is this stuff here. Homoglyphs using Unicode. Deadly. I am very likely to click on that and not know. Let's be honest. Who in here seeing that in their browser wouldn't click on it, right? I mean, for your end users, good luck. And again, if I buy that PayPal, I can get an X509 cert for it because I own that domain. So the lock's there, the whole thing, the SSL is correct, the X509 cert's valid because that's not the real PayPal. It's a whole different PayPal, but I can buy an X509 cert for it. Let's Encrypt. I can set that up in about 60 seconds flat. Done. So I spy to your website. I get a cert for that version of PayPal, and off we go. Absolutely deadly. When I see attacks that I'm likely to fall for, I know my users are in big trouble, right? So that's called DNS Twist. Great tool, great tool. Check your own domain, not just your own domain, but companies you do business with, like your accounting firms, things like that. If you're subject to intense spear phishing campaigns, and we were at the hospital chain. This is a nonprofit owned by the Catholic Church in Boston. Nonprofit. We weren't a big money maker. We got spear phishing campaigns like that against our CFO, against our CIO, especially the CFO accountants. We got targeted that way. Why? Bank transfers. They're trying to rob money. Even cash-starved nonprofits have lots of money. We have 12,000 employees, so we have a lot of money because we pay them, right? So DNS Twist is a great tool. And yet again, Mark Baggett, domain stats. So if you've been using Whois data for correlation, which is great, Whois never been a great data source at all, and GDPR has made it even worse. Whois is just it's an ancient protocol. It's ancient. I believe Whois predates IP. That's how old Whois is. And Whois servers, when you get the response, it's just these unformatted blobs of text. If you've ever parsed Whois data, you know what I'm talking about. This registrar uses this format. This registrar uses that format. It's just blobs of text free-formed. And trying to write like a Python parser to parse that stuff, I've done that. It's nasty. Whois is also less actionable because many sites now redact their data in Whois due to GDPR, the privacy concerns in Europe. And for me, losing that kind of data was a bummer. But for me, one of the most useful pieces of data I got from Whois is when was this domain created? When was the domain created? What country is it in? Those are two very actionable things from a threat hunting standpoint, right? And Whois still gives you that, but it was really hard to get to because it was just all these the formatting was a mess. It was very inconsistent. It was very hard to write those parsers. I've written those parsers, right? So now we have RDAP. RDAP is the replacement for Whois, the officially sanctioned, blessed replacement for Whois. And hallelujah, let the angels sing. It reports in JSON. Yes. I can now parse a JSON object to pull out the creation date of any domain. Oh, that's beautiful. That is so beautiful. Again, how often does your accountant go to, if this paypal.com was registered 3 days ago, right? You can actually catch that. So basically, cache all your DNS requests, look at them, and see how old are these domains. Now, your developers might go to a brand new domain, because they may be building brand new domains. I don't know. But for your non-developers, your non-IT staff, for your average worker, how often do they go to a domain that you didn't create yourself that's under 24 hours old, that's under a week old? It's very uncommon. Again, Whois still gave you that, but it's programmatically hard to get at. RDAP gets you that, and again, JSON is just absolutely beautiful. Look at that. Any programmer is like, yes, hallelujah, yes. I can query this stuff, and Mark Baggett wrote a tool called Domain Stats that queries this stuff. It's beautiful, right? So here's Domain Stats. I said, okay, what's the Alexa? It does the Alexa top million or the Cisco Umbrella top million lookup. SANS.org is 64,900. SANS.org is registered in the US, and SANS.org is created in 1995. All right. All things being equal, especially the 1994. Well, both the Alexa check and the date check indicates it's less likely to be malicious. Now, could a 1995 domain have malware on it? Of course it could. But it's less likely than a 2020 domain that was registered last week, right? So Domain Stats, another fantastic tool by Mark Baggett for threat hunting. All right. That's my talk, folks. I'll hang around for any questions, and thank you. Thank you.